This happened when I was at university. There was a society dedicated to mountain hiking, and I signed myself up straight away. It had always been a passion of mine. My father used to take me hiking from a young age. We had a transmitter radio in our club room. We would check it regularly to see if people were doing okay on their hikes. One of the club members piped up and said, "Hey guys, I'm pretty sure I'm getting a OS transmission here. What do I do?" We all headed to the radio and gathered around. It was there that we heard the undeniable sound of Morse code being transmitted. The sounds of dots and dashes over the crackly radio line. That's OS. Without a doubt. One of the senior members of the club confirmed. He then set about repositioning the antenna to determine the location of the transmission. The signal was coming from the Jotsu border. We got permission to use the society-owned car, and we headed off in the direction of the signal. We didn't have enough information on the situation to call in the police, or even to know if they were necessary at this point. We decided that we would call them once we checked out the situation. Others opted to join us in their own personal vehicles. It took about 3 hours to find the location of the signal. It was coming from a forest area beneath Mount Tanagawa. We parked the car in the parking lot at the visitor's entrance. There were only a few cars parked there, as it was a weeknight. We had a handheld radio with us to help us pinpoint the exact location of the signal. We checked it periodically to see if we were heading in the right direction. The radio started going crazy. It seemed like it was howling at one point. It usually isn't like that, so everyone was surprised. Following the leader of the group, we entered a mountain rail. It was night and dense tree coverage made everything dark, but we quickly found a rucksack. We searched for a while longer and discovered a body. It was too late. We got out of the area and made contact with the police. We were all understandably shaken up by this. I mean, we were only university students. We didn't want to leave the forest. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. We needed to explain things to the police. None of us noticed until much later. But the radio stopped emitting the OS signal shortly after we found the body. And of course, no one doubted the poor soul who perished on the forest trail was the one who raised the signal. But think about it. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. How could a corpse possibly do that? We had this confirmed when the police said that the hiker did not have a radio on his person. What made things even more disturbing was the fact that the hiker had died 2 days ago. How did no one hiking find the body at that time on a hiking trail? The police explained all this in a follow-up meeting with our hiking society. They said that they eventually found a radio in the forest, but it was submerged in a nearby stream. The strange thing was that there was lots of us there, and we didn't see anyone in the area. But that's not to say there could have been someone nearby. Can you imagine that someone in the shadows summoning us to the grisly side of a murder, under the false pretense of an OS, and watching us discover their work? We were there late and we watched all the cars leave the parking lot and not one was left there. That might suggest that someone brought the body there. This isn't resolved at this point. Who the hell raised the signal? We talk about that strange night regularly, especially in the autumn months, in most of our society meetings. I went on a solo trip the other day by car. When I go on these long travels through the country, I usually stay in a cheap capsule hotel near the station or some kind of motel, preferably one with a spa. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary. I was used to this kind of thing. I love a solo road trip through the country. I think this happened on my 4th night of traveling. I can't tell you the exact place. Was I going from Akita to Omori or from Miyagi to Akita? I do know that all this went down somewhere along the Sugar Highway. The highway slopes and wings. It's not a very wide road and is poorly lit with streetlights. These countryside roads are quite common in Japan and they're pretty tough to navigate with other cars on the road. Thankfully, that night it was seemingly just me and my car passing through the area. I remember I was smiling to myself at how twisting and turning the roads were, and I was thinking about making a Twitter post about it. I slowed down to round the corner when I noticed something illuminated by my headlights. A pair of shoes lay by the side of the road. If you're a driver, you've probably seen something like this before, but for some reason you seem really out of place. It wouldn't be that weird to see some shoes by the road in the cities. But when you're out here in the woods, up in the mountains, it's odd. It played on my imagination. A bit. Dark thoughts danced past in my mind. Then I created some distance between my car and the shoes, and then I saw a shadow move into the road and things got worse for me. I hit the brakes thinking it was a deer. But it was a person that stood there in the left-hand lane, a normal person. A normal face. A normal height. This person didn't look ghostly or supernatural in the slightest. It was a woman. It's kind of hard to describe what she was wearing. At first I thought she was wearing a skirt. But now I think she was wearing just a long t-shirt. I don't know how to explain it. But if you saw her playing for a nightclub or a bar, she wouldn't look that out of place. But she did here. My first thought was, what are you doing here? Then I wondered if she had gotten into a car accident, or maybe her car broke down. I had to pull over to see if everything was alright. I mean, I couldn't just leave her there, and I didn't see any of the cars on the road. I noticed that she was barefoot as I slowed my car to a stop. I mean, how could I continue with my trip if I didn't at least check to see if she was okay? I knew that situations like these were more suited to the police. But I thought that she didn't look like some troublemaker addict or anything weird. So I didn't see the harm in checking on her. I took off my seatbelt, grabbed my phone and turned to unlock the door to get out when I noticed the woman staring at my car and then now running towards it. She was in front of my car and she hammered on the hood with her fists. I was shocked. She began to climb the hood of my car and blast her fists into the windshield. She was determined to break the glass. I just sat there shocked and wide-eyed. My brain took a while to get into gear. I remember I just locked and kept making sure the door was locked. Sitting there watching her bash on my windshield doesn't fix anything. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I thought, what do I do? This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Stepping on the accelerator crossed my mind, but then the legal ramifications shut that down. Plus, she's a human. It's easy to say that you could do that if you're not there in that moment for whatever reason. She stopped and slowly slid backwards off the hood of my car. Then she approached the driver's side door. She was moving like a zombie. I kept checking my doors were locked. She grabbed the door handle and started violently trying to open it. I was still in this state of shock and then I snapped out of it. I thought I'd better call the police. I dialed the number and pulled my phone to my ear. I guess this did something to deter her as she bolted off deep into the woods by the side of the road behind my car. Freaking weirdo, man. I really should have hit the pedal to the metal without hesitation and got the hell out of there. But I looked off into the direction she ran and wondered what she was doing. I couldn't tell you why I cared or why I was interested. But I was. I had never seen anything like this. Seconds passed and I saw her emerge from the woods carrying something in her arms, a huge stone. Basically a boulder. Even though it looked heavy. She was moving pretty fast and now she was grinning. I was frozen for a moment staring at her crazed face. Then it dawned on me if she was content to bash my car with her fists. Then it didn't take a genius to figure out what she was about to do with that rock. I stepped on the accelerator and put some distance between me and that maniac. I watched in the rearview mirror as she attempted to launch that huge stone in my car's direction. Now that I was driving, I didn't feel like stopping. Not even to report what just happened to the police. I just wanted to get off this road, out of the forest and away from the woman. I planned on stopping at the next town of it to report what had happened somewhere with people. I was considering this while navigating around a hairpin bend. And then I saw her again. She was in the middle of the highway in front of my car. I was struck with an indescribable sense of panic. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to deal with her again. I was very wary that, as I was about to pass her, she could jump on the car or something. I stepped on the gas and passed her in a kind of wide diagonal movement. She was still like a statue. I was so relieved I got past her. But how the hell is that even possible? I briefly thought I was dealing with the paranormal at this point. Then I noticed that another hairpin bend was coming up on my navigation system. Passing these mountainous roads in a car can be very meandering, as there are many twists and turns in the roads. The quickest way down the mountain is always in a straight line. Therefore, she must have been running through the forest by the side of the road down to where my car was approaching. I was sweating. I had the terrible feeling I was about to see her again right after the next hairpin bend. And who knows what she would do this time. I wanted to be off that road before she had a chance to get to me. I shifted the gears and accelerated as soon as I passed through the hairpin bend, only to find that my efforts would be in vain, as there in the road once again was the crazed woman. She was stood in front of a small tunnel up ahead. She was intentionally blocking it. I just remember I was staring at her. Something about her being barefoot was so eerie to me, I honestly thought for a split second that I had fallen asleep at the wheel. And this was just some nightmare. I didn't want to stop, and the idea of trying to pass her again at high speed was a bad idea. This close to a tunnel. I was becoming insanely anxious. As I was drawing closer to this unavoidable situation, I had no choice but to slow down a little. I swerved into the other lane and thought about overtaking her. Then I noticed her smile. Something about this made me react. Hit the brakes and get back into my lane, thinking back on it. Now I'm incredibly glad that I did, because out of the tunnel came a truck. Had I tried to pass her in the opposite lane again, I wouldn't be here today. She was illuminated by the truck's headlights and mine. She took one final look at me and dashed into the forest. I didn't see the face of the person riding the truck, but I imagine they would have been just as disturbed as me. I seized the opportunity while the woman was out of my way, and I once again hit the gas and shot through the tunnel. When I was on the other side of the tunnel, I noticed that there were no more hairpins or chances for shortcuts. I was anxious for the rest of the journey to the nearest town, but fortunately I never saw that woman again. I ended up in a place called Hirosaki, and there I went to speak to the police. I got the feeling that the officer didn't really believe me. Plus I didn't have any damage on my car, so it was kind of hard to prove anything that I was saying. The way I was babbling about what had happened may have sounded like I was some drunk. He said he would look into it, and he took my details. I was skeptical. After that, my passion to travel alone dwindled. I just pulled into the closest capsule hotel and got some sleep. It was a men-only capsule hotel, and I found that comforting. The next day I searched online and bought a newspaper to try and find out if anything was reported or if there were any existing reports about a strange woman on the mountain pass. Nothing. I found nothing. I decided to use a different highway. When I went back home, it was a very disturbing event, and one that put me off solo travels through forest roads. What was she doing or trying to do? This happened when I went to my friend's house. I rode my motorbike to his house. It was my first time to visit him in his new place. He now lived in the countryside, and it was pretty far away, which meant that people and landmarks were few and far between. But I was able to find his house without getting lost. All the roads were pretty much straight. A couple forks in the road, but nothing I couldn't handle. It was a nice ride, to be honest, and getting back home would be a breeze. Well, that's what I thought. Visibility would be pretty bad due to the forest. Either side of the roads there were rows and rows of tall trees. I made a mental note to head back before it got too dark. Well, things didn't really go as planned, and I ended up staying till around 10 p.m. We were having a really great night because some other friends joined us. I hit the road shortly after 10. I went back the same way I came. The street lights were sparse and everything was so dark, making it difficult to see. I was a bit nervous. There was no sign of human life on my journey so far. It's really creepy and unnerving to ride solo through the roads like these at night. I was anxious something from the forest would leap into the road, but I had to keep going. I was heading home, not to brag, but I'm the kind of guy who doesn't really get lost. I always thought that if I traveled along the road once, I would have no trouble remembering the way. But this time, since it was dark, I was having some real problems. I thought I was on the right road home, but somehow I had managed to stray off the road down another road which turned into a dirt road which led into the forest. There were way more forks in this road than before. How did I end up on this road? I was going the same way I came. If you haven't ever been in this scenario before, I can tell you it feels like a glitch in the Matrix or a time slip. It makes you sweat and pretty confused. Well, it did for me anyway. I didn't know when I had made the wrong turn. But now I was deep in the forest, where the weeds and trees grew so high they almost blotted out the moonlight. I decided to turn back because, at least if I did that, I might see something familiar. The only issue with that was the light. I was riding by my bike's headlamp almost alone. At this point things seemed less and less familiar. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew I was lost. At this point, the road wasn't flat and concentrating on keeping my bike stable was a welcome distraction. Yes, it had been about 30 minutes or so since I first got on this dirt road when I saw a car up ahead. It looked like there were 2 people sat in the car. Perfect. I could ask for directions. I stopped my bike a little behind the car, pulled out my cell phone and used the light to try and find my way to the car ahead before anyone asks. This took place before smartphones. Besides playing Snake, the phone was really a brick which could make calls on the off chance that there was signal. When I got close enough, I called out, "Excuse me." There was no response. They didn't even turn in the direction of my voice. After calling out several times and content that my voice was loud enough for them to hear, I approached the window with my cell phone in hand. When I looked through the window, I noticed something and then my stomach churned. They had disturbingly pale skin. I ran back to the bike skidding. As I went, I jumped on and fumbled for the ignition in my head. I kept repeating, "Get home. Get home. Now just make it home." It felt like this prayer or chant seemed louder in my head and my ears than the splitter of my bike's engine. Not long after I set off once more, I saw the figure of a person walking up ahead. Taking into account what just happened, I was still shaken, sweating and frightened. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to keep going home. I needed out of these forest roads. I was just about to overtake the person. I was still sweating and panicking. Then I heard him laugh. He cackled. Such an insane, creepy laugh. I accelerated. I knew I couldn't turn back now. Even though I was on a motorbike, I thought that weird guy was gonna chase me. I wasn't thinking right. My mind was a fog of fear and panic. I kept my eyes on the road and told myself to stay calm. And eventually I saw the dull glimmer of a street light up ahead. One light eventually turned to 2 and then, before I knew it, I was back on a main road. I pulled over and sat on the ground next to my bike, completely relieved that I had made it out of there. I don't know where the hell I went for that hour, but I'm glad I made it back. Thinking back on that night makes me shiver. This happened about 2 years ago. My hobby is fishing in mountain streams, headwaters mainly. It's the point where one body of water empties out into another. Luckily, I had headwaters not too far from my house and I used to fish there quite frequently. It took about 30 minutes to get there by car. The flow of the river wasn't too strong and it wasn't ever crowded, so it was no danger to go there alone. I remember that it was March and I went fishing the day after an unusually heavy night of rainfall. In order to get to my favorite fishing spot, you need to cross over a dam. I saw a huge deer that day by the dam. Usually the deer run when they sense the presence of humans, but that day the deer didn't. I looked around and saw a small fawn at the bottom of the dam. Perhaps it slipped down there. I thought maybe the bigger deer I saw was one of its parents. It was too late for the fawn. It looked already cold. The bigger deer moved off into the forest. I felt that it must have been sad. I felt something too for that poor deer. Little did I know it was an omen and then things were about to get a lot worse. My mood shifted a little. The day seemed to be a bit darker. Perhaps it was because I had just witnessed the harsh reality of life. I began to set up my rod to do some fishing. I saw no tracks of any other anglers in the vicinity. I had the place to myself. Sometimes in this river you can find some rare fish and usually days like this are perfect conditions for fishing. But I just couldn't shake that odd feeling I had. I couldn't fish right either. I kept hooking my line of weeds beneath the surface, tree roots in between rocks. I thought that this was likely due to the heavy rain the night before deplacing things beneath the surface. But now I kind of think it was a warning. Don't go any further. I also slipped on my ass and I hurt my knee. But then things picked up. I caught some fish, and that's always fun. I got into my rhythm and I didn't want to stop. I wanted to move into another area. I called it 2 pools. There was a base level pool surrounded by huge rocks, an ideal place for fishing. And above there was another pool. I clambered my way over the rocks and grazed my right arm and elbow in the process to get there. But when I did, I sighed in relief and decided on taking a rest. Everything looked pretty much the same, apart from the water levels being a little higher due to the night of rain. Something was off. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. The whole atmosphere of the place seemed different. Somehow, usually around the two pools there is a gentle breeze coming from downstream. But that day it was as if there was no wind at all. Just a strange and eerie stillness. I didn't hear a single bird chirp. Nothing seemed to be moving beneath the water below either. I cast my rod off because that was what I was there to do. And I didn't get so much as a nibble. I thought that I would try my luck in the higher pool. I thought I heard a fish breaching the surface up there. You have to climb to get to this higher pool. You need to navigate around rocks. But it's not so dangerous. When I reached the top, I flicked my line in the pool expecting nothing. But to my surprise, something was almost instantly on the line. Something big. It was about 50 centimeters long. It looked like a trout, yet it was all skin and bones. It was incredibly thin. In such a food-rich mountain stream, never have I seen such a creepy, slender fish. It made me want to go home. I let the fish go and began to pack up my rod. I turned back to leave the way I came and I was astonished to see that the usual way I had gone for years was now blocked by mossy, ancient boulders and trees which looked as if they had been there for decades. Was I losing the plot or did I just lose my way? I wanted to get out of there. I panicked and scrabbled around trying to find another way back down. I found a way back down to the lower pool. Eventually I crept down over the slippery rocks without thinking about it. I jumped down and I managed to keep my foothold and I headed away from the pools. Then I heard a voice call. It sounded as if it came from directly above my head. I looked up expecting to see a human figure peering over the cliffs above. But I saw nothing. I took a few steps back to the edge of the rock that I was balanced on to get a better look. I grabbed the tree branch to hoist myself up to get a little higher. And the moment I did so I heard a voice from behind me. The boulder I was balanced on began to slip beneath my feet. Had I not grabbed onto the tree branch, I would have been dragged down with it into the pool below. I felt like it fell into the abyss when the water and the rockfall settled. I made it back down to the sandy edge of the bottom pool, both of my feet trembling. My whole body was covered in goosebumps, yet drenched in sweat at the same time. This is the closest I've ever been to death. Where did that voice come from? There was no one in sight. I hadn't seen anyone there that day. I found my way back to the path and I walked down. Everything was different. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I just wanted to leave that place as soon as possible. I ran down the river. The river was the only thing which hadn't changed. The next day, I spoke about what had happened with my neighbor. He was an older gentleman who had been fishing in these parts his whole life. He said something that resonated with me. Be it true or not, here's what he said. I wonder if that's the call of the river or perhaps the call of the mountains. Maybe one of them. Yeah, there's days where the rivers call and days where the mountains cool. Maybe invite is a better word. Maybe persuade. Manipulate, trick. However, you want to see it. On days like that, when you hear something or see something that isn't quite right, you better not go so deep into the wilderness now. I live by that advice. You